Hello and welcome to the Pet Travel Insider Podcast, a podcast produced by Starwood Pet Travel to help pet owners who are considering transporting their pets gain an understanding of the process, learn the ins and outs of the import rules for destinations across the globe, and hopefully gather some tips and tricks along the way to make the process go smoother. On the Pet Travel Insider Podcast, we talk to experts including pet transporters, government officials, and vets, all in order to give you the insights you need to approach pet travel with confidence. I'm your host, Adam Melton, VP of Strategic Initiatives here at Starwood Pet Travel. And on today's podcast, we're discussing pet travel to the European Union from the United States. And we're sitting down to talk with one of Starwood's own, Rosie Cann. Rosie is one of Starwood's pet travel coordinators. A pet travel coordinator is a person on our team that's in charge of managing a client's move. Every client is assigned their very own pet travel coordinator, and they're the client's main point of contact and effectively the conductor of the whole move, getting the pet ready by managing vet requirements and documentation, coordinating drivers and flights, and then ensuring really just a seamless, safe end-to-end experience for our clients and their pets. And one of Rosie's areas of expertise is the European Union. So we're sitting down with her to discuss the overall rules for the EU, which are mostly consistent across the board for all EU member countries, but there are some exceptions that she will bring up today, some idiosyncrasies or extra requirements, extra hoops that one has to jump through. So if you are traveling, hint, to Ireland or to Portugal, there might be some extra things that you need to consider. And so we'll be looking at those slightly different rules, and we'll be drilling down into those specifics. Rosie, welcome to the Pet Travel Insider Podcast. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi, Adam. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no worries. Before we get into today's topic, I'd love to hear a little bit about your background, how you ended up at Starwood. How long have you been with Starwood?
So it's just a little bit over 4 years now.
Okay.
And I came from more of a service industry background where I was working in a managerial type position there. And that was down in New Orleans following college where I'd gotten a fine arts degree in printmaking. And so I was working service industry, and I had started up a nonprofit art market that I was just kind of running as a pop-up around town. And then COVID hit.
Okay.
Big game changer, of course, for everyone. And
yeah, for sure. Even for the pet travel industry, that was a weird time in this at this company when no flights were going, so no pets were traveling either. So you didn't have a background in pet shipping, surprisingly. You came from another world, like most of us, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I'd gotten some experience with dealing with logistics before I kind of made this transition, and I applied for actually a completely different position with the company. At the time, we were helping puppies get to new homes. And so I started off helping coordinate those a little bit, and then graduated on up to international travel.
And that's where you are today. You're one of Starwood's pet travel coordinators, assisting clients day in and day out, getting their pets safely and efficiently overseas. Do you have a pet yourself?
I do. I have one cat. He is here beside me in the office most days, making sure I stay on task, take good care of all the pets.
Yeah, and giving you inspiration, right?
Exactly.
Awesome. So we're sitting down with you today to discuss pet travel over to the EU, to the European Union from the United States. That's one of the lanes, one of the areas of expertise that you have. You're helping folks every day get pets from the US over to the EU. So I'd love to jump into today's topic. And maybe we can just start by, imagine I'm somebody that knows nothing about pet travel. I'm one of our typical clients who has never done this before and has no idea where to start. How do you kind of talk about the process at a high level, kind of give an overview as far as getting the pet ready for travel with all the EU import rules in mind?
So I think for kind of blanket start, both cats and dogs, the process is going to be very similar for both of them. There isn't really a big difference. And so one of the first things I always like to make sure of is that, your pet or pets have been microchipped prior to their most recent rabies vaccination. That's very important. Some of the EU countries also require dedicated proof outside of that rabies certificate of microchip implantation. So you definitely want to make sure that's in good order, because once that new rabies shot is given, it's going to start a 21-day timer on being able to depart.
Okay. And
So
what exactly are the rules with the rabies? So it has to be, you said 21 days, it has to be at least 21 days old by the time of departure. Any other,
mhm.
like, how old can it be?
For rabies certificates, they have to be at least 21 days old, cannot be more than 1 year old for
Okay.
arrival into the EU. That
Okay.
rule used to be a bit more relaxed and allow up to 2 or 3 years rabies vaccinations to travel, but that is a thing of the past.
So no older than a year and at least 21 days old at the time of arrival or departure.
At the time of departure.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, perfect. So we have microchip implantation, rabies. What's kind of the next step in the high level overview of getting a pet ready for import into the EU?
Hmm. So I definitely like to talk to my clients about what their travel plans are, especially depending on if you're traveling alone, traveling with others, traveling for work.
Hmm.
There can be all sorts of timelines that could come into play. And one of the biggest impacts on what kind of dates are going to be viable for departure and what sort of timings will be involved in the final health certificate are going to come down to whether or not the owners are going to be arriving within 5 days on either side of their pet's arrival into
Okay,
the EU.
gotcha.
Now, there are a few exceptions to that rule where a few countries like to make it a little bit more tricky, a little bit more
Okay,
complicated, or have more specific rules regarding entry in
gotcha.
relation to your pet.
Yeah, and I definitely want to drill down into some of those destinations in the EU that kind of have some idiosyncrasies to them. They don't follow necessarily exactly the EU pet import scheme, and we can touch on that. But with that, you said that if you arrive outside of 5 days on either side of your pet's arrival, that dictates something. What exactly changes if you are arriving outside of that 5 days on either side of your pet's arrival, that window?
Yeah, so outside of that 10-day window, it goes from being what they call a non-commercial to a commercial
Okay.
customs clearance.
Okay.
And with the commercial documents, you have to have the health certificate appointment 2 days before departure, and there is no wiggle room in that. So because the USDA is not open on weekends, that would mean typically a Monday departure, sometimes a Tuesday departure can be viable as well. But that would also play into if your pet is going to have a layover point, because most
Okay.
often layovers, I tell folks to expect those to be an overnight.
Gotcha. Okay. So that's the commercial situation where you have to have the health certificate done within 2 days of departure, you said, right?
Mhm.
And then what about if say I'm traveling on the same day or a day or two after my pet? What does that look like as far as that final health certificate goes?
Mhm. So, when you are arriving within 5 days, that non-commercial health certificate, you could typically schedule, I recommend 8 days. You could do it 7 days out. I find that eight kind of hits a sweet spot in that it allows the USDA adequate processing time while also kind of guaranteeing a little bit of wiggle room in case there were to be any sort of unexpected flight delays, cancellations. So you don't have to immediately turn around and try to rush to redo everything and end up delaying travel even
I
further.
see. So a little bit of cushion in there, right? You don't want to get it at
Hmm.
the latest possible date. Okay, that makes sense. So we do the health certificate, and you're kind of talking about the timing of when to get that health certificate, and that's all dictated by the owner's travel plans and when they're traveling. Okay, so you figure that out. You put kind of a pin on the calendar. This is the date that you should get that health certificate. What else leading up to that health certificate are you checking and or is the team checking to make sure is in proper order?
So for the pets themselves, one of the most important things is going to be kennel fit and
Okay.
making sure that there's, adequate space in that kennel to satisfy airline regulations because they're very, very strict about how much space a pet needs to have and increasingly strict. We've actually seen a kind of a buckle down in the past couple months as to the regulations concerning ventilation hole size, where a lot of formerly approved travel crates are no longer approved without a special mesh being installed.
Oh, wow. Okay. And that special mesh is probably not super easy to put on. You have to have some know-how how to do that.
That typically adds about an hour per pet to get that mesh installed.
Okay, so it's all the name of the game is trying to find the right crate manufacturer that doesn't require that meshing just to avoid that at all
Hmm.
costs. Gotcha.
Yep.
Okay. All right. So you're figuring out kennel style and fit, both which the airlines, as you said, are kind of getting pretty particular about. And so you're doing that while leading up to closer to the departure date. And then when you get to that point of a health certificate, what exactly is happening at that appointment?
One of the most critical aspects of that appointment is a microchip scan.
Okay.
They want to scan the chip and very carefully compare the number that they scan to what's listed on both the health certificate and rabies certificate to ensure that everything, matches across the board. Something we'll see every once in a while is, a vet tech 3 years ago might have reversed two of the microchip numbers as they were typing it in, or one digit is off. Where if you catch it at that point, super easy to get it fixed. But if it doesn't get caught until the pet is already in the EU, then it becomes way more of a drama.
Okay. What just out of curiosity, what happens if there's a wrong digit in the microchip number? It's close, but maybe there's one digit that was off. What exactly happens in that case?
Yeah, I mean, so far in my experience, the EU has been pretty understanding that human typos and errors are bound to happen. And so usually what they want to do is they'll reach out to the vet who did the health certificate appointment and have them connect directly with the customs team at that airport location to provide additional, verification that that microchip was just incorrectly recorded.
So they'll connect with the vet in the U.S. and kind of do a one-to-one verification that that it was just a typo and it's not
Mhm.
something else. Um,
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, so we have that, and that's kind of an edge case. I know speaking for Starwood for what you do with the clients and our team in general does. How exactly do we prevent that from happening? That sort of microchip document mismatch that, as you said, can cause some significant delays and issues when the pet arrives in the EU.
So, at the onboarding call, when we first start off this process with the new client, we always start off by chatting about the microchip. And I'll hear a lot of clients say, oh, my pet was microchipped when I adopted them 5 years ago, but I don't know the last time that chip was actually scanned. Most often, folks, we encourage them to go in anyhow and like get up to date on some general vaccinations so that way if any sort of emergency boarding is needed, they're going to have that as a nice safety net
Gotcha.
ready to go. So I say, hey, go in, make sure all the general vaccinations are all up to date, have the vet scan that microchip, make sure it's still there, make sure it's still working as kind of a jumping point to establish that chip.
Gotcha.
Um, I did have one strange situation, and this is kind of my one and only microchip story.
Uh-huh. Yeah, do
Is
share, do share.
a family of pets was headed to the UK, and by the time they landed, they went to scan one of the pet's microchips. It was a cat, and they realized they couldn't find a microchip anywhere. But the vet
Okay.
swore up and down it had been scanned multiple times, and so we were all kind of scratching our heads like we got the pet x-rayed to try to avoid any sort of 21-day quarantine.
Wow.
And
Okay.
it turns out that the microchip was implanted in the cat's collar, its feeding collar.
Oh,
So,
wow. Okay. All right. So they
yep.
were able to find it eventually, but because they were trying to scan the cat's body, but not the collar, obviously. So they were able to find it.
So they found it, they figured it out, but the cat did still have to get properly microchipped, like a
Oh,
chip
okay.
implanted,
Okay.
and
Gotcha.
then
Gotcha.
21 days in quarantine.
The pro tip here is double check that your pet was not microchipped in their collar, but actually in their body, right? Okay.
Yep.
But as you said, kind of an extreme edge case there. But now you mentioned that was a move to the UK, and 21 days of quarantine is required if there is that missing microchip. Does the EU have that those same rules regarding microchips missing?
Correct.
Gotcha. Okay. And now, of course, hopefully that's all avoided if they, take your advice. They go into their vets early on in the process to get those general vaccines done, but also to make sure to get a microchip scan, make sure it's matching all the records. But going back to the health certificate appointment, you said that that's part of what's done at that final appointment, right? Prior to departure, they're going to scan the microchip.
Mhm.
And then what else happens at that appointment for the health certificate?
So by and large, it's an exam to check out the pet's heart rates, respiratory rates, make sure that there's no points of big concern that might prevent them from safely being able to complete travel. Now that said, I've seen pets with stomach staples, pets who just got diagnosed with cancer, this, that, and the other, who have all still been able to pass their health certificate exams and still travel. It's one of the common concerns I get, especially for elderly pets. And, with elderly pets and snub-nosed breeds, we do also encourage clients to kind of have an earlier conversations with their primary vet about, the pet's health and how that could be impacted by travel, because not every primary vet is going to be USDA accredited, which is a requirement for the health certificate. So we like to encourage folks to make sure that they're connecting with a vet who knows their pet most intimately.
Gotcha. Okay. So backing up a step, when you're trying to figure out the date to do that health certificate, you're trying to figure out the date, but you're also wanting to make sure that the vet that the client is scheduling with is USDA accredited. That's an important condition. And why is that important? Because what happens? So you said that they do the exam, they're checking various vitals and those sorts of things to make sure the pet is fit to fly. They sign the health certificate, I'm assuming, right? And then what happens
Correct.
at that point?
Yeah, so once the health certificate has been signed, the vet will submit the documents to the USDA for processing. Now, I would say probably 99% of vets these days are able to submit it electronically to the USDA themselves, and that is an absolute requirement for the commercial documents because they have that 48-hour turnaround. Whereas with non-commercial, you could technically submit via FedEx, in which case we would provide a prepaid priority overnight FedEx label to
Mm-hmm.
get it in there, but it often seems it is just a potential for more complications to arise when you have to submit via FedEx.
Right, right. And that's the VEHCS system, right, that the USDA has. Um,
Mhm.
and so we recommend avoiding FedExing that, and we recommend working with a USDA accredited vet, but also a USDA accredited vet that is set up on that VEHCS system, right?
Correct. Yeah, and if they don't have it set up, but they would like to get it set up, I know our vet team has assisted vets in the past getting
Gotcha.
that rolling. From what I understand, it typically takes the vet about an hour to get it
To
get
set
it
up the
ready to
account.
go.
Okay. Okay. So
Mhm.
no fear if your USA accredited vet that you're planning on using doesn't have that VHEX system set up yet. They can do that. The team at Starwood can even assist with that if they would like. Okay. So that's good to know. So it's submitted electronically through this VHEX system, the health certificate that says, hey, this pet is fit to fly. The vet has signed off on it. Then what's the timing and what's happening at that point?
Yeah, so once that health certificate gets submitted to the USDA for processing, typically takes about 1 to 4 business days. Of course, in the summer months for the US, it's going to take a little bit longer, usually about the 4, sometimes 5 days. And that's just kind of down to the processing times and the volume of people traveling. But for the EU, because there's no sort of additional treatments
Hmm.
required, I do typically have the documents returned directly to our local partners, kind of at the airport of departure. So that way the documents are arriving as close as possible, allowing them the maximum amount of return time possible.
Gotcha. Okay. So then at that point, the pet has is ready for travel. I do want to back up a few steps because I forgot to ask you about this. Because I know some destinations have kind of peculiar or very specific things that they are looking at on the rabies vaccination certificate, which you mentioned at the beginning is one of the first things that we're reviewing and guiding our clients on, because you have to have that within a year and 21 days of departure. But the actual document itself, what advice and kind of rules does the EU have as far as what needs to be on that rabies certificate?
Mm. So there are a lot of fussy little particular details about that, which our vet team will take care of getting amended directly with, the vet who administered that
Hmm.
shot.
Hmm.
Um, for the EU, they do prefer a ink signature to be the original signature
Okay.
on the certificate that's sent with the pet at the time of departure. However, they will also accept like a digital printout or a copy of that wet ink version. So, we do, especially for Dublin, I know that they do tend to prefer the wet ink a little bit more than some of the other EU countries. And so, in general, I guess one other kind of heads up, because 99% of rabies certificates do require editing to become travel approved.
Hmm.
That can get very difficult if your pet was vaccinated at, say, like a pop-up clinic or a Vetco where they have rotating staff, because then the vets aren't always necessarily available, or the records don't kind of exist in a more permanent nature,
Okay.
where it can become difficult, if not impossible, to get those edits done.
And
Uh,
so yeah, that brings up two questions for me. So the edits, you said 99% of the certificates we see have to be edited in some way. That might come as a shock to some listeners, because a rabies certificate is a rabies certificate, right? Like they
right.
have it on hand. They went up to they got the pet vaccinated whenever, and they have it on hand, and it looks great. But you're saying in most cases those have to be edited, which is probably a surprise to some listeners.
hmm Yeah, I think most people just assume that, once it's been done, it's ready to roll. Typically takes vets about 2 weeks to get everything right,
Wow.
kind of off the bat. And then, even when it's like if we realize on the onboarding call, okay, your rabies vaccination is on year 2 already, so
Uh huh.
we know you definitely have to go and get it redone. We will send the vets instructions as to exactly how that certificate needs to be formatted, but like I said, there's just so many particular details that have to be exactly up
Yeah.
to standard, that even with those instructions and the best try, it still usually needs a few more
So go
a
like
few more
and
edits.
of course our team is we have people our vet coordinators that are actually calling the vet clinics and advising them, saying, hey, this certificate you issued, it's missing XYZ, and hopefully the vet clinics will turn that around properly the first time. But as you said, sometimes it takes 2 weeks for
hmm
the vet clinics, like going back and forth to get it right, just because there's such detail, precision and detail there. So I imagine that's one of the biggest first hurdles that you have when a new client is signed up and getting ready to move with us. That's kind of like the main thing you have to get right first. That dictates all the travel plans thereafter, right? Like that kind of sets the stage for when the pet can travel. And so and maybe speak to that a little bit, because I know a lot of people don't understand that pet travel is not like human travel, right? Where you, when you book your own flight, you go in and pick a date and a time, a certain flight, you put in your credit card, hit buy, and you have your travel plans. But it just doesn't work like that for pets, right?
No, no, and I mean, I kind of want to confess, like when I first started this job, I thought it was more of a just a luxury service for
Uh,
pets.
yeah.
But over the years, I've also had a handful of clients who are like, I tried to do this myself already, sometimes twice even.
Hmm.
And they'll get all the way to the destination, and then those documents are not in good order, not what they need to be. And so they were either looking at a very expensive 21-day quarantine or additional issues and fees, where at that point they were just like, we have to go back and redo
Wow.
this whole process.
just because of how nitpicky some of these rules are and requirements. Okay.
Hmm.
Gotcha. So you mentioned just a moment ago that Dublin, they have an emphasis on the wet ink signature. They don't like the copy of the rabies certificate. So maybe we can drill down and look at some of if it's Dublin or some other destinations within the EU that have a little bit different emphasis or rules that differ slightly, or there's extra steps that differ from the overall EU pet import scheme.
Yeah, I mean, Dublin is a good place to start. They have some unique rules pertaining to the commercial versus non-commercial documents that are a bit different than the 5-day rules that we
Okay.
generally see.
Okay.
So, if a pet is flying directly from the
Hmm.
US to Dublin, which is going to be only as an Aer Lingus flight,
Hmm.
then they want the owner to be on the same exact flight as their
Oh,
pet,
okay.
which is generally it's not a requirement anywhere else that I've seen. Um, and so if they're flying direct and you're not on the same flight,
Hmm.
then they require the commercial documents. If you are on the same flight, then the non-commercial are fine.
Okay. So
So
they
that
add that to that the 5 day. So even if you are traveling within 5 days, but you're just on a different flight, they're
mhm,
going to require the extra hoops to jump through for the commercial import, right?
mhm. Yeah, and the customs clearance is also going to be a little bit more expensive with the commercial.
Okay.
But as I said, that is only if your pet is flying direct. And so with that, I was kind of nervous. I expected there to be kind of more issues where we would sort of have to redo a commercial health certificate
Hmm.
once the flight gets confirmed.
Hmm.
Because, depending on when the flight is confirmed, that can sometimes be after, the 8 days out when the health
Hmm.
certificate gets done for a
Hmm.
non-commercial.
Yeah.
But with Aer Lingus, they have been really good. They've been great about, like the owner booking their flight, saying, I'm flying on this flight, this
Hmm.
routing, and then approving the pet to be on the same flight. I've never had them not approve the
Okay.
same.
Okay. Gotcha.
Um,
And
that
that's probably
said,
that's probably something most people don't understand either, is that the booking of a pet's space on an airplane is completely different from booking a human space on the airplane, right? Totally different
mhm,
departments within the airline. And so even if you see a flight listed, sometimes a pet can't go on that flight, right? Because of different
mhm,
restrictions of that aircraft specifically, or the arrival times. So it's just another point of how different pet travel is from human travel, I guess. And then um, with that Dublin situation you're talking about, it's almost as if uh, we should kind of take the lead on saying, hey, this is the flight that your pet is going to be on, and then the owner books their own flight. That
mhm.
way they don't have to try to mess around with moving it around. Is that usually a recommendation if they haven't booked their own flight yet, to wait?
Yeah, so a lot of times I will tell people to either, book a flexible ticket or get booking insurance so that they can switch their flight if needed. The other thing is we'll usually go online, look at what kind of Aer Lingus offerings there are for afternoon departures. Typically ends up being, kind of most common pet departure times are between about 3 to 10 p.m. And that has a lot to do with how much earlier a pet needs to be checked in. So, like for Aer Lingus, they'll want pets to be checked in 5 hours out.
Okay.
Um,
What are some other
so
check-in times that are typical that you see for pets traveling over to the EU? Is 5 hours the norm, or some airlines they require shorter check-in times, longer?
mhm. So Lufthansa would be 5 hours, and KLM is at 6 hours.
Oh, okay, wow. So that's again another difference of pet travel versus human travel. Human travel,
Hmm.
the recommendation I think officially is 2 hours for domestic, 3 hours for international. But in some cases, your pets need to be at the airport checked in 6 hours before departure. So something to keep in mind when you're kind of thinking through your own day of travel logistics, right?
Yeah, and so with Lufthansa, like I said, 5 hours. KLM is 6. And so, especially if we're having to pick up a pet and
Hmm.
travel a longer distance. Sometimes that also means collecting them the evening before to make sure that they can be there early enough. So if it's a Lufthansa flight departing from the West Coast at 2 p.m., that usually means that we're looking to kind of have them heading to the airport around about 8 a.m.
Wow. Okay. All right. So the name of the game is you got to be flexible with the pet's travel plans. It's not going to
Hmm.
be like the normal windows and when you need to leave for human travel. You got to be flexible. Okay. So we've touched on Dublin. Are there any other EU member countries that have unique considerations compared to the overall EU rule set?
Lisbon, Portugal, in general, so Porto as well. We do see a lot of flights going into there, and they recently changed their requirements in that they want an owner to arrive within 5 days before their pet. So it's not 5 days before or after, it's just 5 days before, or else it becomes commercial.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And
Interesting.
the other thing that they want to see, which is very unique to Portugal, is they want to see your actual boarding pass instead of just a screenshot of your flight booking confirmation or kind of an e-ticket, if you will.
So with the Portugal arrivals, how exactly do you recommend? I mean, what do you have to do to prove the ticket? Is it just print out the actual ticket and then have that on like a paper copy of it, or what does that look like?
Mm. So, like I said, they want a boarding pass specifically. I did recently just have someone supply like a screenshot from their phone of the
Okay.
boarding pass. A lot of times I do get a photograph of like a printed out actual ticket on the
Okay.
owner's day of departure. Um, so they will accept the e-ticket in that sense,
Uh-huh.
but it
But
has to be
not
the
but not
boarding
but not a
pass.
confirm Okay. Yeah, that's what yeah. So not the confirmation email, but the boarding pass itself. And so
Hmm.
none of the other EU countries have that specific requirement. They're happy with just the confirmation email that you have a ticket.
Exactly.
Gotcha. Okay. And then any other EU member countries that have specific requirements that kind of are different from overall EU rules.
Mm. So a lot of the countries kind of generally have items that they'll ask for, kind of helping to prove the owner's residency. So a lot of times they'll want like a registration number with the EU municipality where, you know, folks are setting up shop. Uh, Most countries do request a relocation letter. Um, a lot of times, if it's a military relocation, they'll ask for military ID and a print, a copy of the military orders sending them there. Uh,
Okay.
Housing or rental contracts are another very common request for the majority of the EU. So employment and housing contracts both are
Okay.
fairly par for course.
Gotcha. But each country might have a little bit different requirement as to what they want to see to kind of show where they're living or whatnot.
Hmm.
Gotcha. Okay. Okay. So we've touched on Dublin, Portugal, and how, each country might have different documentation rules for showing where you're going to be living. Any other locations that come to mind that have kind of unique requirements?
Um, None that stand out too greatly. I mean, I believe in Munich they like to see they want like that proof of residency or registration number, or there's one other document that they'll accept, but one of those items has to specifically be no older than 12 months at the time of the pet's arrival. And I think that's just mostly, I think a lot of these commercial versus non-commercial rules
Hmm.
are aimed at, trying to prevent people from just sending over a lot of puppies, like
Ah,
breeders just sort of running a puppy mill into the EU. So they make
gotcha.
it a bit more tricky and really want to have that verification to prove that the pets are going to a home.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. The justification for that. Okay, so curious. We get a lot of questions, and a lot of people are searching about pet passports. Is that a requirement for getting into the EU? You didn't mention that in the high level overview, so I'm curious if that's a requirement or not.
No, so pet passports are not a requirement coming from the US into anywhere in the EU. I know it will make it a little bit easier if you're kind of going on to do additional travels and transiting through the EU to have that pet passport.
Hmm.
But I do know, kind of generally speaking, sometimes we see a flight into one country where we do a land crossing into
Hmm.
another.
Hmm.
And at that border, they'll usually still want to see kind of the health certificate documents, um,
Gotcha.
and whatnot, where there is still layers of customs checks happening.
Gotcha. Okay. So the pet passport's really only probably useful to get once you're over in the EU and you're established to kind of make crossing borders easier with your pet, right?
Exactly.
Gotcha. Okay. So no pet passport required for the EU. What about quarantine for the European Union? I know you mentioned that there's some edge cases where if the microchip isn't in, then there's 21 days of quarantine. But in general, are there quarantine rules for the European Union?
No, I've never once had a pet actually need to quarantine
Okay.
in the EU.
Okay.
Um, Really, the only time that I see pets kind of delayed from being released, which isn't quarantine specifically, but it's, if there are kind of discrepancies on the documents that
Gotcha.
need to be
Okay.
verified by the vet. And so that is also kind of one of the big reasons why we don't really generally allow weekend departures, arrivals, or kind of layovers. Because if those kind of issues come up, the vast majority of vets are closed on the weekend.
Hmm.
And so that's going to mean that, your pet is essentially stuck there until the vet reopens.
Okay, so sort of de facto quarantine, but typically we just see a longer release time, right? Which can might in this case might take a day or two to get things sorted out, but it's not properly speaking quarantine. It's just a delayed release.
Exactly, yes.
Gotcha. Okay. Typically, if all the paperwork, microchip, everything is in working order, how long does that release or import process when they hit the EU country, their destination country? How long does that take?
Usually for the EU, it's about 2 hours, sometimes three. I mean, we say it could be as much as four,
Gotcha.
but that's not typically as common.
Gotcha. I know with our services, we kind of insist on using a customs broker in the destination country to make that process go smoother. I don't know if you have any experience with clients trying to do it on their own, but that's generally speaking not advised, right? To have the client try to clear customs themselves.
Hmm. Yeah, I think it can be hard to find the right type of kind of official who has the certifications to properly clear customs. And that's the same thing on the US side.
Hmm.
It's not that any old Joe can just kind of go back into those areas and check pets in.
Hmm.
Um, you have to have special handling accreditations in order to handle check-in and clearance on the other end.
Gotcha. Okay. Let's talk about some travel logistics, which we've already touched on a bit. But you mentioned that there are some direct flights from the U.S. to destinations where folks are going with their pets. Air France, right? If you're traveling to Paris, a bunch of
Hmm.
U.S. cities have Air France service into Charles de Gaulle. If you're going to Germany, you got lots of Lufthansa lift from the US directly into Frankfurt. There's other airlines as well. But I think, as you mentioned, a lot of our itineraries are indirect, right? They require a
Hmm.
layover. But what does that exactly look like if we can't get a direct flight from your origin city to the destination country you're going to?
Yeah, so a lot of them will route either through Frankfurt or Amsterdam. And with that, I kind of mentioned this earlier, but they'll have a state vet kind of waiting when your pet first lands so
Hmm.
they can make sure they're doing well after the first leg of travel, give
Hmm.
them a microchip scan, give them a checkup,
Hmm.
and then they'll have individual rooms set up for each pet. They do not allow for kennel shares at these locations, so
Hmm.
they would be on their own, but the teams there are really great. I know especially in Frankfurt, they'll even like bring in kind of regular food and water dishes, which is going to be the most familiar for the pets, make it a little bit more comfortable for them. I also have noticed in some photos that we've gotten from Frankfurt that they'll like bring out nice big dog beds to make it a bit more comfortable. And so I think they really do. The teams in both locations are great
Hmm.
and take wonderful care of the pets and do everything they can to make it as stress-free of an experience as possible.
Gotcha. Yeah, it sounds kind of nice actually. So you have Lufthansa going the Frankfurt situation, the Animal Lounge there, and then you have KLM when you mentioned Amsterdam. That's what they call that their animal hotel, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, yeah. So they get food and water. They have a bed. They have their own kennel run area, and in some cases, photos of the pet on the layover. So really nice opportunity for the pet to take a break between flights. And as you mentioned, the vets are also doing checks on them. Does that, if they are transiting through one of those European hubs, Amsterdam or Frankfurt, in that vet that checks on them, does that help the clearance process and their final destination country in the EU? Does that expedite it at all, or does that change?
So it that kind of seems to vary a little bit. Sometimes it does kind of help speed it up, where they'll do more of like a cursory check at the final destination. Um, but like if this speaks more to the UK, but like if they're going to the UK, then they kind of have the EU clearance and then the UK clearance separately.
Because of Brexit.
Hmm.
Right. Okay. Gotcha. Okay. But if you're staying within the EU and you have that layover, in your experience, you do notice that maybe even though they are having to take that extra time on the layover, it actually you do save some time on the final destination side because the state vet has already done some work on that.
Yeah, I would say generally speaking, yes.
Gotcha. Okay. Interesting. I think that really wraps up what I wanted to discuss today. I really appreciate you taking the time, Rosie, to sit down with me and the Pet Travel Insider podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Adam. It's been fun.
And I want to thank the viewers for joining us today. If you have any questions or need help with your pet's upcoming move, please feel free to visit our website where we have tons of free resources and where you can also easily request a quote for our services. Of course, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can stay up on all the podcasts we have coming up. Until next time, I'm Adam Melton for the Pet Travel Insider podcast. Thanks for listening and safe travels to you and your furry friends.